Good morning, this is Miss Wills again. I'm just going to continue looking at Act 2 of an Inspector Calls with you. And we're going to be focusing on Gerald again today. And as always, I just would like to remind you that the lesson objectives will be on the next slide. I would just like you to identify them, but also make sure by the end of the lesson that you're comfortable that you have met them. The green text boxes are tasks you have to complete, and the red are challenge tasks. So we're going to start by looking at the lesson objectives. As I say, we're going to be focusing on Gerald's character today. We will read up to page 40. You'll consider what kind of man Gerald is, what he represents in the play, and finally what Priestley is trying to say to the audience through the construction of Gerald, Miss Sibyllin, and Sheila as well. So you will be looking at page 29 in your booklet today and carrying out the tasks. Okay, so let's start with the first task, which is a true or false task. There are 8 statements on this slide. I would like you to write either true or false next to the statements. And I would also like you to try and challenge yourself by thinking of any extra statements you could add to the task above as well. They are all related to Gerald and Gerald's character. So please pause this clip and carry out that task for me. Okay, hopefully you've managed to do that. I'll now like you to check your answers against mine on the screen here. So we'll quickly go through these. Gerald is socially superior to Sheila and her family. This is true. He is in the upper class, and they, of course, are in middle class, upper middle class. So he is above them on that ladder, which is why Mr. Boleyn and Mrs. Boleyn are so happy that he is marrying Sheila, of course, because that kind of elevates them a little bit more in society as well. Gerald lacks confidence and is ill at ease with himself. That is false. He does come across very confident to us at the beginning. Gerald plans to propose to Sheila. Well, that's false because he already has, and that is what they're celebrating. Gerald has very different attitudes about the world in comparison to Mr. Boleyn. That's false also because it does seem so far that he supports what Mr. Boleyn says at the beginning of the play, what Mr. Boleyn says to his family. Gerald supports when Mr. Boleyn is interrogated. Gerald kind of supports him there as well. Mr. Boleyn seems to favour Gerald over his son Eric. This is true. Eric challenges Mr. Boleyn, and of course, he does drink a little bit too much, and Mr. Boleyn, he undermines him, whereas with Gerald, he kind of puts him on a pedestal, doesn't he? Probably because of his position in society, and probably because Mr. Boleyn essentially wants to use Gerald to climb up that ladder as well. Gerald's family are rivals in business with Mr. Boleyn. True. Gerald is a similar age to Sheila. False. And finally, Gerald's family don't seem happy about Gerald's relationship with Sheila. This is true, and is kind of, supported by the fact that they did not come to the celebration. They are not there at the dinner. And also, to them, Gerald is marrying beneath himself. So that is probably why they are not too happy and comfortable with the engagement. Okay, moving on. What I would like you to do is you're going to read Gerald's interrogation next. So we've looked at Mr. Boleyn, we've looked at Sheila's, now it's Gerald's turn. So I'd like you to turn to page 27, which is the start of Act 2, and read to page 40 to the stage directions where Gerald says he goes out, they watch him go in silence. So I would like you to please pause this clip again and read those pages. While you're reading those pages, I would like you to consider how Gerald is sort of reacting to the inspector. And also, is there anything Gerald might say throughout his interrogation that is quite alarming, quite shocking, and possibly tells us quite a lot about his character and the type of man he is. So just bear those sort of questions in mind and just highlight any key quotes that comes up that you think tells us a lot about his character. So we just pause this clip. Okay, guys, what I'd like you to do next, and this should be in your booklet, this table, you should have a table here that has a description, quotation, and analysis it asks for here for Gerald's character. Now you'll see in the top right hand box here we have a number of words that you could use to describe Gerald. What I want you to do is I want you to choose 5 words that you could talk about in relation to Gerald from what you've read. And I want you to, as I've done on the table here, and this is an example, okay, I would like you to write down your description in this box, your word. So this is an example here. We've got respectable. Then I would like you to find a quotation from what you've read so far, and this is including Act 1. I would like you to put the quotation as is done here in this box. So we've got respectable, the easy, well-bred man about town. Okay, that's the quotation that's been chosen here. And then for the analysis, just discuss how this shows us he's respectable. What does this actually tell us about his character? So here it says Gerald is a man that others would admire and consider respectable. He comes from wealthy and well thought of family, comes from upper class family, from old money. He's a comfortable and confident man with engaging, charming manners. It is only in his private life that he may not be considered respectable, as he keeps Eva as a secret mistress and discards her when it suits him. So essentially, he may come across respectable on the surface, and that's what he shows society, but he does have this kind of hidden side to himself and secret life that suggests a sense of corruption maybe there and sin as well. So I would like you to choose 5 other words and do the same as what's been done here for those words, please, in terms of analysing Gerald's character. So please just pause this clip again. Okay, hopefully you managed that task and you found that quite easy to do. If you did find it challenging, don't worry as long as you've given it a go. The next slide then. We now need to think about how Priestley uses his characters. What are they supposed to represent? They aren't real people, they are constructs and they've been put on stage for a reason. So we've obviously looked at Arthur Boleyn and you've discussed this and thought about this and jotted ideas down in previous lessons. But what he represents, he represents capitalism. He represents this kind of middle class that exploits the working class. He represents the older generation who have outdated views, who seem and appear not to change as well. So that's kind of what Mr. Boleyn represents, and that's what we've discussed in previous lessons. And then if we look at Sheila, she kind of represents the more sympathetic and open-minded section of society, and her ideas and attitudes are similar to Inspector Gould's. So perhaps this shows that the younger generation are more influential and they're more willing to listen and they're more willing to change, and she represents this change and hope for the future, the importance of actually educating younger people and educating society in order to create change, and that's kind of the ideas around her character there. Bearing that in mind, we're now moving on to Gerald. I would like you to consider what Gerald actually represents. He's a little bit more difficult, Gerald, isn't he? But around this, on this screen, you've got a few quotations about Gerald. And I would just like you to have a little think and jot down any ideas about what you think his character might represent. If you just pause this clip again for me, please. Okay, hopefully you've managed to get some ideas down there. And I'll just discuss my thoughts about Gerald a little bit with you here. And of course, Gerald represents the upper class, doesn't he? And to me, I think what Priestley's doing here is he's criticising the upper class. The actual image they portray of themselves is quite, especially with Gerald here, like he's a gentleman, he looks perfect, pristine, dressed well, charming, but really underneath it all and underneath the surface, if you scratch away under that surface, you will find corruption and the fact that, they do also exploit those from a working class background like Eva Smith, which we see with Gerald as well. It's this idea that he's come from old money and he's been born into it. He hasn't had to work hard for his position. Okay, so for him, he's quite comfortable in society. I also think, as I put on this side, that Priestley presents Gerald as a man who avoids all his responsibilities and uses both Sheila and Eva slash Daisy to show us this. He uses them both for his own advantage, really. Now, I would like you to think, do you agree with this statement? And if so, where would the evidence for this be? So hopefully when you've read through his interrogation there and you've been highlighting some quotes, there might be some that you could use to support this statement here. So I'd like you to just pause this clip and take 3 minutes to prepare your ideas, and then I'll discuss a couple of things that I picked out with you. Okay, hopefully you've managed to get some things down there. Now, for me, the first thing I've kind of seen that I kind of stood out to me in his interrogation is when he's starting to talk about Eva and the first Daisy and the first time he met her. He then kind of stops and says, "Sorry, well, I've suddenly realised taking it in properly that she's dead," and this is top page 35. To me that kind of shows that, even though he's known for a while now, because the inspectors interrogated Mr. Boleyn and Sheila, he's known for a while now that this girl has died. He kind of it's only dawning on him now. What mattered to him most was his reputation at first. He tried to deceive people. He tried to let on that he didn't know her. That's what mattered to him the most. But the fact that a girl he knew and supposedly cared for has died, well, he only really starts to consider that now when he's forced to talk about it. And, I think that says a lot about his character and how he also is very full of self-importance and cares more about himself than those around him. As well as this, on page 37, he talks about how he became the most important person in her life and how, he enjoyed being the man who, she pretty much worshipped and fell in love with. He enjoyed being in that role. It made him feel good about himself. Therefore, he used her to make himself feel better, and then he just kind of tossed it to the side, and he didn't even try to get in touch afterwards. He admits to the inspector he wasn't sure what happened to her afterwards. He didn't really care. He'd got from her what he wanted, then he just forgot about her. So yeah, it's this idea he does definitely use her there, and he's not really taking responsibility. He seems to feel more sorry for himself after he's been interrogated than anything else. When he has to leave the house because he's upset about it, he's bringing that back to him rather than poor Daisy. So yeah, there's loads of things you could have had written down there. So for the next activity, you will see that there is a table here, and there are 3 quotes to do with Gerald. I would like you to think about Gerald's progression throughout the play, and I'd like you to think, does he change throughout Act 1 and 2? And do the audience now like him at the end of Act 2, perhaps? Now we know his kind of relationship with Eva. I would like you to complete this table for me, so if you can just pause this clip again to do that. Okay, so what I would like you to do now is I would like you to look back at your scale that you have. You put Gerald on the scale of accepting responsibility last lesson. Now I would like you to add to it. Would you keep him where he is? Would you put him somewhere else on that scale? And I'd like you to use another quote from Act 2 to support your decision as well. So I would like you to do that as your last activity for a day, please. And then, of course, send your work to your teacher. If you have any questions with regards to anything that I've talked through this lesson, or if you're struggling a little bit or finding a task challenging, please just get in touch with your teacher. Thank you very much for watching.